Hi, welcome to Ms. Richardson's U.S. History 5-Minute Lectures. This information will be U.S. Notes 2.15, Hoover versus FDR. It includes information that aligns with Section 3 of your Unit 2 study guide. Remember, you have control of the lecture, so pause when you need to write down some information, use your study guide to help you figure out what to write down, and rewatch if you need to. Use your study guide to help you study as well. So let's go ahead and get started. By 1932, the U.S. had been suffering for 3 years with no end in sight. Americans felt hopeless and resentful of the government, especially the president, President Hoover. They felt he had not done anything to help them, and they were ready for a change. The Democrats nominated Franklin Delano Roosevelt as their presidential candidate. Though he came from wealth, the opposite of Hoover, who came from a modest background, he identified with the average American. Roosevelt did not follow the ideas of the presidents who'd come before him. He was ready to change things to improve America, and people really liked this. They were ready for the change. He brought hope and optimism. They liked that he reached out to the average American. After his nomination, he actually flew to Chicago and gave the first ever acceptance speech at a nominating convention. He promised a new deal for the American people. Americans saw hope and optimism in FDR, and hope and optimism had been completely lost under Hoover, so people really liked Roosevelt. In the election, Roosevelt won in a landslide, 472 to 59 electoral votes. So 23 million popular votes to less than 16 million for Hoover. So the people had spoken and they wanted help. They wanted a change. Roosevelt was then inaugurated on March 4th, 1933. By that time, 4,000 banks had collapsed in the U.S. and $9 million savings accounts had been lost. So you can imagine the amount of money in 9 million savings accounts. 38 states had actually declared bank holidays where they closed the rest of the banks to stop the bank runs so they didn't all go out of business. And 25%, 1 in every 4 Americans, was unemployed. People wanted help, any help of any kind. So in his inaugural address, Roosevelt promised America what it wanted. He said, "Let me assert that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. This nation asks for action, and action now." You've heard part of that quote. This is very famous, and people felt like we were going to do something. So even though Roosevelt took office with no real plan, he did promise bold, persistent experimentation. He would try something. Americans were ready to try something. So just to compare the two presidents, and this here, I'm not going to go over everything, so you might want to pause it and take some time to look. Hoover and FDR, if you look at this chart, you can see how they differed. Hoover really resisted putting too much money into the system. He wanted to fix the system itself, but he didn't want to give any direct help to the people. Roosevelt was willing to try any means necessary to help America. He spent huge amounts of money on stabilizing banks, supporting industry, helping individual Americans, and creating jobs. So you can really compare the two and see how they were different. So we'll look more at FDR's plans, called the New Deal, in the next 2 sets of notes. There were some differences in the early part and the late part. So this is actually the end of U.S. Notes 2.15. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in class with any questions you have.